Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. There's a lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, YouTube's campaign of weeding out channels that do not comply with their internal political views has just been ratcheted up another gear. While it is quite okay to publish videos attacking Donald Trump, and many thousands doing that are on the YouTube platform, it is no longer allowed to attack a radically left-leaning politician in the Democratic Party in New York. Her name is Cortez, or commonly known as AOC. Google who is AOC for more info. If you publish a video demeaning AOC, your channel is demonetized on YouTube, and it is only a matter of time before they take your channel down. Now that is political censorship. Clear and simple. In effect, and I'll show you the actual evidence of what I'm talking about. Here we go. There you go. YouTube has now twice ruled that criticizing AOC is a violation of their policies and will result in demonetization. Isn't that extraordinary? In effect, channels have been corralled into presenting videos that meet YouTube's editorial agenda. Sadly, as a result, the integrity of YouTube channels is being increasingly undermined. Censorship on YouTube is now like a minefield, and I'm so pleased that we have established Loving Life TV, as I cannot operate in an environment where I have to second guess what YouTube might do if I say something that one of their snowflakes finds offensive. This is one of the issues I'll be talking to Yusuf about tonight. Now, I'll get Yusuf on in a second. In fact, let me get Yusuf on now. And please, guys, remember to subscribe to be kept informed, or register on Loving Life TV. I see we have got a number of guests here. Please make sure that you register, because we will be sending out shortly emails daily with all the updates on Loving Life TV platform. We just got a few little minor things we're fixing first before we do that. All right, I'll get Yusuf on. fine. While I'm waiting for Yusuf, don't forget Dan Merriman's Sunday service goes up tonight. Hi, Yusuf.
Hi there, how are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you indeed. I can't see you though.
For some reason, I don't know what. Let me just see. But now you can see me. I think that's slightly clearer.
Oh,
I just
yeah,
want to
there
see
you
if we
are.
could probably try with a microphone or a headphone. I just want to try a headphone and see if that's more uh, impacts far more better in the sound. So I'm going to try and attach this,
Right.
and you just let me know if the sound works well for you.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Say something to me, Yusuf.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you either way. It's both fine.
Okay, both is fine. So let's just see how it works, and we could take it from there.
Yeah. Now,
Great.
Yusuf,
It's been a long time.
I've just been talking about censorship on YouTube, which is a big hot topic right across the big tech platforms. Now, I would like your views as to how censorship on YouTube is impacting what a lot of opinion makers believe is the truth about what is going on behind the scenes with things like the lockdown, the vaccines, etc., etc. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I certainly do. Look, censorship has been an ongoing thing for some time. It's not the first time that we're seeing censorship happening. It has been going on for quite a considerable period of time, for close to 5, 6, 7 years. What we have seen, however, increasingly enough, is the fact that since 2020, and particularly since the imposition of the global lockdown, the introduction of talks on vaccination and the like, you've seen a far more greater degree of censorship and control, more than has ever been in the past. I think one of the issues are that, for a long time, you had the media, which was essentially, controlled by a select few. And since 1998, 99, 2000, with the introduction of the internet, particularly, people in fact had the ability to in fact share information, give out alternative information in terms of compared to what the conventional views are that are presented in mainstream media television or mainstream
The
newspapers.
fake
And when
news.
that happened, yeah, absolutely. You could say not all of it, but a lot of it is. And when that happened, mainstream media, there was a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of how information was in fact viewed. And with that came, of course, the danger that people were no longer willing or prepared to basically go ahead with the conventional views that were presented in your print media or the television news. And interestingly enough, YouTube, Google, the World Wide Web, for a considerable period of time, in fact, provided this degree of freedom that people would not ordinarily have. You could create, like you did on YouTube, like many did on YouTube, and so on. And what happened with this happening? There was such a significant dynamic paradigm shift, and I want to share a few disturbing things with you. Is the fact that this proper utilization of freedom of expression resulted in the creation of a diabolical process since the COVID lockdown, which consisted in identifying all those who were opposed to, for example, the government's management of the coronavirus pandemic in this particular context. And those opponents were categorized then as so called antisocial, in some instances, psychopaths. And the unspoken objective was by and large to shunt the emergence of an organized protest movement pertaining to social engineering. And the decision taken worldwide at a political level to close down the national economies of more than 150 member states. But that lockdown narrative, supported by the media, disinformation, online censorship, social engineering, fear campaign, that was essential in shutting down the alternative voices that became so popular on YouTube, that became popular online. And so you have a situation, Scott. Maybe we can touch on this. Is that even you had the opinions of mainstream prominent scientists who questioned the lockdown, questioned the face masks, or questioned social distancing in a general sense, were taken down by Google. Now the position is that YouTube doesn't allow content that spreads, according to them, medical misinformation that contradicts the World Health Organization or local health authorities' medical information about COVID-19. Now, I'm not so sure. I believe your channel was shut down for a considerable period of time. I'm not so sure what medical misinformation you were giving out that contradicted the World Health Organization, other than simply challenging the status quo of what you see being broadcasted by mainstream government. It seems to me that people and the establishment would rather be comfortable in people accepting the fake news than accepting alternative information, which tends to get uncomfortable to
But you know what,
mainstream
Yusuf?
discourse.
Yusuf, it's called freedom of speech. Our freedom of speech has been totally trampled on by big tech. And just for people who don't know, Google own YouTube. So when we talk about Google, we're talking about YouTube. So what is happening today, and this is very important and very relevant, because so many people now are in the dark about what is actually going on when it comes to the vaccines, the lockdown, their rights and stuff like that, because they are being shut down by the alternative media, by YouTube, which is why we have lovinglivetv.com, because there they can't shut us down. It's our own platform. That's why on this platform, I'm encouraging people to register, because I often put up videos here which would be taken down in a flash by YouTube, because they go contrary to their own perspective. Censorship is absolutely blatant on YouTube, and it's completely demeaning the whole idea of a free society.
Well, Scott, YouTube has been, it came out in 2006, but initially by, I think, these three young chaps in their 30s back then.
The worst
and
thing
now
they
it's
did was
controlled
sell
by
it to Google.
Yeah, they sold it to Google. They made billions. Now it's controlled by the CEO, I think, is Susan Wachowski, strangely enough. But it was and still is a powerful media platform. I mean, you've amassed 93,000 subscribers. Other channels, some more, some less. And you were getting views and others were getting views which your mainstream conventional TV news stations were not getting. Now, that's obviously going to be a concern to the establishment, particularly when they view the fact that people are now no longer getting their information directly from the conventional toolboxes of control, which was, in the past, your television set, you'd have the news at 8 o'clock. Now you've got 24-hour news. Now you've got alternative 24-hour news. Now you've got 24-hour sports channels. So we're living in an information superhighway. And with COVID-19, if COVID-19 hit the world, say, in the 1980s, I mean, the level of dissent would not be as high as it is today with the information out there, because at that stage, you just had your television, limited news channels, and you had your conventional print news media, which probably came out sometimes once a week, sometimes just your daily newspaper. Now, with the power that people have with the alternative information, they've got no response. They've got no what we are doing now intellectually, and this is a challenge I'm putting out to the establishment, either the medical or the political establishment. Intellectually, they cannot take you on. They cannot debate you. What's the next step? The next step is to shut you down. If they cannot rebut you, if they cannot refute you, if they cannot counter your argumentation with another form of sound argumentation, the only thing they can do then is to muffle you, to censor you, to control you, just like in the classical Orwellian sense of Big Brother. But I want to share something with you, is that in Brazil, just listen, this is just now. There was an empirical study that was done last year during this whole pandemic in relation to YouTube and in relation to news media and alternative information and so on. There were studies conducted where people were now looking at the whole notion of the compliance or non-compliance with containment measures to the COVID-19 pandemic over time. And these non-compliance, the non-compliance was also seen where people, for example, give information out there contrary to the established political establishment. And what they did in this particular study, and I'll just give you a quotation, in Brazil, they identified two distinct groups. And they categorized those groups who challenged the political establishment. They categorized them as individuals having an anti-social pattern profile. These individuals are to be viewed as deceitful, hostile, impulsive, irresponsible, manipulative, risk takers, and they should be ostracized by society. They should be ostracized by those who are obedient to government. And the research methodology was essentially based on three questions. Was that one, do you think it is necessary to avoid approaching people as much as possible until the COVID-19 pandemic is controlled? If you answered no, then you were viewed as antisocial. Do you think it is necessary to use a face mask? If you answered no, it's not necessary, you're viewed as antisocial, as a sociopath. So automatically what's happening, people who are, not necessarily disobeying laws publicly, but people who are now just simply challenging the models that are being presented. What's the evidence for this? What's the evidence for face masks? What's the evidence for the efficacy of vaccines? They are automatically placed as antisocial. And so not surprisingly, YouTube has introduced a policy on the basis of suggesting that you are creating a degree of risk and medical misinformation to the public, and therefore you have to be categorized as antisocial and you have to be removed. They also described people of this particular nature, just simply challenging the government position, as individuals having collective narcissism. So in other words, you and I, who both are against the political establishment view, would be viewed as narcissistic. They describe this as maladaptive personality traits. And this is disturbing because this is not just the end. This is just simply the beginning of a far more deeper trait that happens. And like we call, and like I've said before, the totalitarian tiptoe, like the frog in the hot water bottle. If you pour boiling water, the frogs are going to jump out. But if you just simply increase the temperature by 2 degrees every single day, eventually, when the water is boiling, the frog would have realized it's too late and would have died. And that's essentially what's happening to society today, where people are deemed as having adaptive and maladaptive behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic. They have to be ostracized, and therefore your channel is shut down. Therefore, you're banned from speaking.
Yusuf,
and so on. That's what happens. Yeah.
I just want to talk on that point because for 2 weeks, YouTube did take down my main platform with nearly 100,000 subscribers. They actually took it off for 2 weeks. And for some reason, it just suddenly reappeared again, which is fine because we're using it as a marketing tool to get people onto lovinglifetv.com. But in the last couple of days, they again gave me a community strike on the Loving Life channel. And all I did was I had the temerity to actually film part of a news program that went to air nationally around Australia on Channel 9, where they were talking about the issues relating to AstraZeneca. And they were saying that, there are some adverse effects. And they had this horrendous figure saying that 2/3 of people in Australia who've had AstraZeneca vaccine have had adverse effects. Now, that video is still up on YouTube on Channel 9's channel. But when I dared to put it up on my little Mickey Mouse channel called Loving Life, it got a community strike because of medical misinformation, which is really disturbing because both Twitter and YouTube say that it will remove all posts that suggest there are adverse impacts or effects of receiving vaccinations. Now, that's exactly what was presented to the entire population of Australia on national news, the legacy television news, and it's still up there on YouTube on their channel. So these big channels are treated differently to the smaller channels. And it's just one of those little hypocrisies that you can see how YouTube are trying to shut down channels that that they deem to be dangerous because they might be letting out some of the truth that they don't want people to know.
Yeah, I think that is a disturbing point. And what is also quite remarkable is that, the AstraZeneca vaccine has been discontinued in the South African context because it has been viewed as somewhat weak in relation to this apparent mutant variant that exists. But particularly overseas, and this is, now you can go even on the mainstream news channels. I'm talking about BBC, Sky, some of the European channels. There've been extremely large numbers of cases of individuals, for example, that are developing blood clots. There've been deaths that have essentially occurred as a result of this. And
these are facts.
It seems to me
these are facts. This isn't made up misinformation. This is not medical misinformation that they're trying to put out there, and why they're giving you community strikes. These are facts. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, that is a problem because you are just simply, it's not even a copyright. You're not infringing their copyright. You're not giving out information that is incorrect. You're just simply sharing something that has been shared globally by your particular mainstream channels, and it seems to me that is unacceptable. So there is a control in terms of who can give out information. And it seems to me now also that whilst you, for example, can question things such as, alternative health remedies and so on and so forth, strangely enough, you are not allowed to question, for example, the vaccination process. You cannot question that whole, idea. The main point is that which goes to the core of the issue, which is not allowed. This is totally disallowed. Is that how is it that a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, which under normal conditions takes years to develop, any good vaccine would take years to develop. This was launched in early November 2020 after being introduced in laboratories in June 2020. So it's June, July, August, September, October, November.
Less than 6 months.
This is unheard of. This is insane. It's totally unheard of. Because on their own particular standards, they in fact claim that this is an mRNA vaccine. I'm not necessarily anti-vaccines in general, but they claim this is an mRNA vaccine. Pfizer has claimed again and again and again that it was based upon experimental gene editing mRNA technology, which possibly has a bearing on the human genome. The other issue is, the second question is, were the standard animal lab tests using mice or ferrets ever conducted? Or did Pfizer and did AstraZeneca just simply go straight to human guinea pigs? Because the human test began in late July and early August. And 3 months is unheard of for testing a new vaccine. Because look at what happened. April, you had the global lockdown. I mean, in February, March, we were not talking. April, you had a lockdown. April, May, June, already human tests began. In 2 months, that means the vaccine was ready in 2 months for human tests to be conducted in July, and then it goes into systematic distribution by being launched in November. I mean, this is impossible. It's an impossibility. And by simply asking a logical question, how is this possible? You shut down. Absolutely.
It's Russian roulette. Now, I've got a couple of people asking if you can sit back a bit because you're losing half your face on the camera.
All right.
Can you move your camera down slightly?
All right, just let me get to the main. I just want to increase this. While you're doing
that, I just want to recite to you what Frederick Forsyth said earlier today. Now, Frederick Forsyth is the iconic British author who released the following statement. Okay, this is what he said. He said, "I have only once before seen anything like it." He's talking about the lockdown. "This was when I posted to East Germany in 1962. Such a brainwashing tactic was employed to frighten East Berliners into believing that the Berlin Wall was a defensive measure to protect them from tiny West Berlin, and that the Stasi was their guardian. The wall was, of course, an instrument of enslavement. And he went on to say, I never thought that the government of a country whose uniform I once wore, and he's talking about the United Kingdom, with such pride, would sink so low. Those responsible should be identified without delay and ousted from all office over us. Now, I think that that's what a growing percentage of the population around the world believe. They think that we are being completely misled by this craziness, this lockdown, these regulations that are put in over us. What are your comments about that? About what Frederick Forsyth had to say and the lockdown?
I think, if you look at it from an analogous point of view, it's highly prophetic. We are presently at the crossroads of one of the most serious crises in world.
Sorry, guys, we've just got one of those little internet glitches that happens in South Africa. I'm sure Yusuf will be back in a few seconds. Let's just see what's happening on the side chat. Guys, please remember to register on lovinglifetv.com. And, we put up videos that you, as we're talking about here, you can't put up on YouTube. Yusuf, I've lost you. The internet we got a bad connection here.
Of the pandemic.
No, Yusuf,
and the unspoken truth is...
Yusuf, sorry,
yeah.
I lost everything there because the internet went down your side. Can you start again from the beginning?
Sure. Just let me know if there's an internet problem. I hope you're not getting one of this again. I'm just pointing out that, what is...
Oh, no. This is a head-banging moment, guys. I'm sorry. This is absolutely crazy. I'm going to suggest to Yusuf I'll reconnect with him and see if we get a better line. This is just ridiculous. We'll just wait for Yusuf to come back on. Mark says, I do not think this vaccine was developed in a year. The pandemic was planned many years ago. They've been working on this vaccine and are only running human trials now globally. Well, I don't know about that. I know that Moderna has been developing messenger RNA for years, and they've got a lot of patents. And of course, that's run by Bill Gates, which is a huge, huge issue. Bill Gates, I see, as the Antichrist in person. He's got his fingers in so many different pies. Okay, I'm going to... Okay, Yusuf is gone. I'll just call him back. Gotta love the South African internet. Okay, we'll just try again. All right, well, look, so far in this discussion, just in summary for those who've just joined us, we've covered censorship on YouTube, which is growing more and more invasive, literally by the week. It's become a highly compromised way of actually getting a message out there, which is why my main Loving Life channel at the moment is locked, but it'll be coming back on again next Friday. It looks like Yusuf has completely lost his internet. Let me just keep trying. Marlena, could you just give Yusuf a call and ask him to try and Skype me? Okay, while we're just waiting for Yusuf, I'll just read to you something that is of relevance to what we're talking about. Several medical doctors who oppose the COVID consensus or the vaccine have been arrested. Get that? They've been arrested. In December, Jean Bernard Fortillium, a retired university professor known for his opposition to the COVID-19 vaccine, was arrested by law enforcement officers under military command and forcibly placed in solitary confinement at the psychiatric hospital of Uzes. Fortillium is known as a longtime critic of vaccines that use dangerous adjuvants. This is how, like Frederick Forsyth said, we're moving into a Stasi state. It's like East Germany during the Cold War. That's what's going on right now. And I think the Stasi have just taken down Yusuf's internet connection, guys. Now, while I'm waiting for Yusuf, I see Nat Quinn is here. Now, Nat is in charge of our Loving Life forum, and I do encourage people to check it out because, you know, we got some great articles, great links, great information on that particular platform. Okay, Marlene, if you can just ask Yusuf to call me back once he's got his internet connection back again. All right, let's keep on going here. Okay, just another comment which is of relevance to what we're talking about. The March 11th, 2020 lockdown project uses lies and deception to ultimately impose a worldwide totalitarian regime entitled global governance. Now let's just okay, he's trying to call me, but I'm not getting his call. Okay, I'll just oh, here we go. Now we seem to be back.
Hi Scott, how are you?
Good, we're back.
I don't know what's going on. This is South Africa, and I don't know if we're being bombarded by something or a gremlin here, but my internet connection seems to be fine. But somehow or the other, I'm having challenges connecting you, so I hope we don't have the same problem again.
Yeah, let's hope not. Now, can you start your answer again? Because just after you started, what happened was it did the same thing.
I'll try again. What I was basically saying is that we are at the crossroad of one of the most serious crises in history. And essentially, you know, the unspoken truth, which people need to know, is that this virus, in fact, provides a pretext and a justification to powerful financial interests, to corrupt politicians, to precipitate the entire world into a spiral of mass unemployment, bankruptcy, extreme poverty, and despair, as has never been seen before. I mean, this is a true picture of what is really happening. It's a result of a complex decision-making process. I mean, planet lockdown, global lockdown, which we've never seen. That's an encroachment on civil liberties, encroachment on the right to life. Economic, you know, entire national economies are in jeopardy. In some countries, martial law was declared. I mean, we've seen a case of martial law in South Africa. And more importantly, billionaires have gone richer. They've, you know, the list of the 25 billionaires has increased. The wealth has increased, but you've got small and medium-sized capital are slated to be eliminated, big capital prevails, and there's a massive concentration of corporate wealth that's ongoing. It's a diabolical situation that is happening. Now, the problem is there may be a particular virus, but despite that, this is being used as a justification to impose an order which would serve a select few, which we've never seen before in human history. You gave the example of Frederick. I don't know if that was cut off, where he pointed out the issue of the Berlin Wall and the example of the Berlin Wall. We are living history. Our time has, we talk about the depression in the 1920s. We talk about, for example, famine that happened in the 19th century. We have never seen in 1,000 years what we experienced in 2020 going on into 2021. And yet our understanding of the sequence of events since January last year has been totally blurred because people are being misled by their governments and the media as to the causes and the consequences, and alternative news information, alternative channels like this, like many others, are being shut down. That's the reality that is happening. I have seen, and by the way, I must say, I have seen deaths. I've seen people close to me that are dying. There is certainly something that is going on, and there's two sides of the coin at the same time. There's the COVID deniers totally who are just saying there's absolutely nothing out there, and then there's the extremists on the other side who are saying, well, you need to shut down, stay locked in, don't go outside. Nothing along that particular line, but the point being made in the long term is that when the World Health Organization declared this as a pandemic in January, there were only 83 cases outside China out of a population of 6.4 billion people. And in the days preceding the February financial crisis last year, there were about 453 cases.
Now, can I
And the
just
point being
add to
made,
that, Yusuf,
yes,
that
yeah,
a week before the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic, in a press release which was sent out a week too early, the World Bank stated that the coronavirus was a pandemic. A
yes,
week before the World Health Organization said it. So clearly the instructions are not coming from the World Health Organization, they're coming
yeah.
from the World Bank. And the World Bank was implicit in the bribes that were sent to senior politicians to bring in lockdowns. In fact, I think it was the Polish president who refused his bribe, and they basically, turned their backs on this whole thing that's happening around the world today.
Well, it's interesting, and I think I mentioned this in one of our earlier live streams, probably sometime last year, and people haven't looked deeper into this. Event 201, that simulation that was carried out in October 2019. Event 201 on YouTube, you can find it. YouTube, what they've done conveniently on their channel, Event 201, which is under the YouTube channel of the John Hopkins Center for Health Security. They've disabled the comments because that Event 201, that simulation, got something like about 12 million views, and people were looking and saying, "Look, what the hell? This is a simulation that is talking about a pandemic and all the steps that needed to be taken 3 months before an actual pandemic actually happened in the real world." And people were basically questioning what was happening. But study what Event 201 did. Many of the features of the Event 201 simulation exercise, in fact, corresponded exactly to what actually happened when the World Health Organization Director General Tedros, in fact, launched the global public health emergency together with the World Bank, and of course together with for example, some of these other major institutions like the World Economic Forum. This parallels exactly what happened. And so the point being made is that the COVID crisis is a sophisticated instrument of the power elites because it has all the features of a carefully planned intelligence operation using deception, counter-deception. I think Leo Strauss basically made the point that viewed intelligence is a means for policymakers to attain and justify policy goals, not to describe the realities of the world. And that is precisely what they're doing in relation to COVID-19. Now, I want to make this clear, Scott, because there are deniers out there. And I'm saying those who are out there who are saying that there is absolutely no virus, there's nothing whatsoever, they also need to be cautious with that kind of information because that form of disinformation does a disservice to those who are actually challenging the establishment narrative. There is clearly something going out there people are dying. Not necessarily. It's not extremely deadly, this virus, but I mean, I've had personal experiences of people close to me. My own magistrate passed away in December. I have no explanation as to how that happened because he was recovering on the Friday, and on the Sunday, his wife sent us a message stating that he had just suddenly died. His heart stopped beating. So it's either the hospitals are killing people, which people have to then present some degree of proof, or alternatively, there's something that is actually happening which we don't understand. One thing which I cannot accept is that somebody somewhere in the world just simply ate a bat, and that just
I was
basically
about to
created
say,
some degree of virus.
that the source or the origins of this virus, whatever it is, are still in doubt, and China's clearly
Yeah.
playing devious little games with the World Health Organization, who apparently are under their thumb. Now,
Well,
that yeah, carry on.
yeah. Yeah, what I was saying is that we always talk about Wuhan, and the Wuhan fish market,
Yeah.
or that market wake up. But what people don't know is that in Wuhan there is a Wuhan Institute of Virology, which and click this up on Google. Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And it's
It's an
funded by the
institute.
CDC, by Fauci.
Amazingly enough, there was a significant amount of monies that were transferred by the CDC to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in 2018 and 2019. I mean, all this quite remarkable, and dealing in dangerous viruses, and then suddenly, globally, at the same time, you have something that happens. I cannot, for the life of me, just simply believe that somebody eating a bat would cause such a massive crisis. And at the same time, in a similar fashion, I cannot accept the views of those who basically just simply say that there is no COVID-19, or COVID-19 does not exist. In the past, the so-called conspiracy theorists were labeled as those who believed that people engage in germ warfare. And today, unfortunately, amongst the alternatives, there's that view is no longer popular. It's more popular to suggest that there's no virus whatsoever, and the whole virus is a conspiracy. And I'm saying that that's also a dangerous position to adopt.
Okay,
Let's have a
let
more
me be
measured
the devil's
response.
advocate, Yusuf. Let me
Yeah,
be the devil's advocate. What happened to the flu last year? No one got it,
well,
but we had the coronavirus. Now, the flu is actually a coronavirus.
it
That's
is.
what the flu is. It's a coronavirus. What they've done is they've labeled the last year's
Yeah.
flu as a pandemic. And if you look at the death rates from flu going through the last 20 years, last year the number of deaths from COVID-19, which replaced the flu for some reason, for some weird, strange reason, the actual deaths amongst people in 2020 was not dissimilar to previous years with the flu. So what they've done, I believe, is they've simply labeled the strain of coronavirus, COVID-19. In other words, they've named the strain of flu for 2020. They've named it COVID-19, put a label on it saying this is a pandemic. And now we've got all these lockdowns and everything else happening. And look, people die every year from the flu. There is no difference to what happened in 2020 to 2019, 2018, 2017. This is why I believe it's a scandemic, and this is why I know I'm going to have to move this live stream off YouTube after we've finished, because it will be taken down, because dissenting points of view like I've just given are not allowed on YouTube. This is how crazy this has become. Over to you.
Well, for one thing, I believe there was a flu last year. We did in fact have the flu. It's nonsensical to say, as has been said in the mainstream media, that there was no flu. The
All right. Well,
conventional
let me tell
seasonal
you
flu
why. Let me
that
tell you
did
why
in
I
fact
disagree
happen.
with you,
Yeah.
Yusuf. I'll tell you why I disagree with you. Because Marlena, who looks, Marlena well, she saw
Yes,
her
sure.
doctor last week. She saw her doctor
Yeah.
last week, and she asked her doctor, and this is in a big practice in Krugersdorp, and she asked her doctor, what happened to the flu? Did anyone come into your practice during 2020 with the flu? And the doctor replied, no. She had no cases of the flu. This is a big practice in Krugersdorp. But of course, they had thousands of cases of COVID-19, didn't they? Now,
Which
explain that
was
to
the
me.
flu, that's the whole point, Scott, which I'm making, is that in most of those cases, those COVID-19 cases would ordinarily have been viewed as
That was the
the
point that I
seasonal
made just
influenza.
now. That's the
Yeah,
point I
that's
made
the
just
whole
now.
point. And
Yeah.
and I think but you see what my argument against is that, there is now a new body of evidence, and this goes into the field of virology. There's a very minority view of scientists out there. I think one of them is Thomas Cohen. You've got Anthony Kaufman, who believe that viruses in general don't exist. There's this theory of debate between Louis Pasteur and Anton Béchamp, and Anton Béchamp believes contagion is not true. It never existed. So in other words, these individuals will say there's nothing like chickenpox, the measles, influenza, mumps, and all of that. These are all caused by the environment. And based on that very minority scientific viewpoint, they would therefore argue that by extension there is no COVID-19. What has happened now is that you've got individuals, they're not scientists, they don't have a medical background whatsoever, but they are now saying, based on the whole notion of germ theory or lack of germ theory, that because of this particular minority scientific view, they don't go with the entire view, by the way. Therefore, they argue that there is therefore no COVID-19, but they will still accept the existence of chickenpox, measles, and so on and so forth. My position is this: is that last year you had cases of seasonal influenza, and the RT-PCR tests were picking that up and simply being labeled as COVID-19. And you would and not surprisingly, you would have number of. I mean, this is a situation. Coronaviruses are a large family of viruses which cause illnesses in humans or animals. There are several viruses over the years, in MERS and so on and so forth. But the most symptoms of COVID-19 are fever, dry cough, and tiredness. Now, these symptoms can be either mild, they begin gradually. Some people have been infected, but some have mild infections. In many instances, this is similar to the common seasonal influenza. And around about 1 out of every 5 people who gets COVID-19 apparently becomes seriously ill and develops difficulty breathing. Now, my particular issue is that the overall statistical analysis that has been presented by our government, by your government in Australia, by the World Health Organization, has not been clear, because they have not taken into consideration this particular nuanced phenomenon and nuanced perspective. I believe there is certainly a strain out there. A strain is not that deadly. It can be deadly, but there is a strain out there. But this does not in any way mean that the seasonal influenza did not exist last year. And I believe that many people who had the seasonal influenza were possibly labeled by COVID-19 because the RT-PCR tests are not specific to say, look, this is COVID-19, this is a seasonal influenza, this is chickenpox, this is cancer. They will just simply detect the genetic material that you would possibly have, and thereby make that particular assumption that, look, you have this particular thing. But again, this is something that is important to note. Why is it that the same medical establishment figures have been repeatedly lying to us on the particular rate of seriousness of this particular illness? In some instances, they were arguing that is mild, it's similar to the influenza. In other instances, they were basically arguing that is extremely serious, justifying more lockdowns. And the way they came to this was a utilization of what I call this faulty RT-PCR test, which was just simply used to estimate and tabulate the number of so-called COVID-19 cases. But what this does, in a general sense, and Carrie Mullis, who was the individual who invented the RT-PCR test, it only detects a very tiny segment of the nucleic acid, which is part of a virus itself. But it doesn't, in fact, tell you whether the person is ill or not. So you had people that were tested as COVID positive, but they were fine. They were very, very fine. Yet in my case, I mean, in December, by the way, I came into contact with someone that apparently had COVID. I went for a test. It was negative. It came out negative. Yet I experience a degree of exhaustion over, I think, a day or two, and excessive degrees of vomiting. So what is going on here? The point being made is that the tests that are basically being used are fraudulent. Those tests that are used for the qualitative detection of nucleic acid in the respiratory systems of human beings, via the nasal swab, which they thrust up to your nose, they're not entirely accurate. And with the result of which, the so-called positive infection and negative infection could be the result of co-infection with other viruses. And not surprisingly, in relation to this, Scott, the CDC stated that it does not rule out that a COVID positive test could in fact also arise as a result of bacterial infection or co-infection with other viruses. So you could be sick in a general sense. The agent detected may not be the definite cause of the disease, but the RT-PCR test goes and says that you are basically COVID positive, and then you are basically deemed as sick. You have to be shut down, and this is essentially what happens. Positive result is when there's a viral genetic material in the sample. It occurs in some people, it doesn't occur in some people. If there's no viral genetic material in the sample, then there's no amplification that occurs, and people are not deemed as COVID positive, but they could possibly be sick. So a positive test doesn't mean that you have the virus or that you could transmit the virus, and the negative test also doesn't mean that you do not have the virus. And that's the dilemma that we have in this particular instance, Scott. Over to
Well,
you.
yeah. Well, what I find very, very interesting is that AfriForum took SAPRA to the
Yeah.
High Court over ivermectin, and they won an iconic case. And for everybody who's listening, you can now go to your doctor and demand that they prescribe ivermectin to you. This is actually a court ruling. I actually put up the court ruling on my lovinglifetv.com channel. If I put it up on YouTube, it would have been taken down for medical misinformation, even though you've got the court ruling there, because it puts the vaccines in a bad light. Now, talking about that, Yusuf, are you aware that Google owned 10% of Pfizer shares? Now, isn't that a
Um,
conflict of interest?
Well, I mean, of course it is a conflict of interest, but I mean, the point being made is that we need to start making the argument that Google and YouTube are just simply not private companies, but they're essentially public utilities. And as a result of being public utilities, they have a role and a responsibility to play in terms of how they are giving out information. The fact that Google has got shares in Pfizer obviously means that negative information on Pfizer, negative reports on Pfizer, lawsuits against Pfizer, if you do a Google search on them, they're not going to pop up. So they control the information. I don't know, they work according to this algorithm, particularly when they wish to curtail the popularity of a particular website or story, which would go contrary to the official narrative. And so it's only after many, many searches on Google are you able to basically find this. I'll give you one example. There was a very popular website in Canada, which was run by the University of Ottawa. One of the guys was someone that I had interacted some years back, Professor Michel Chasodowski, who runs the Center for Research on Globalization, globalresearch.ca. If you click on that website before in the past, it would immediately pop up. But I've noticed the trend that since 2020 and onwards, April 2020, it's difficult to find on search. You have to basically type the actual address in the what you call this in
Address
in the
bar.
bar
Yeah.
right on the address bar, right on the top. You can't just find it, and it's so common with everything. I mean,
It's
even
called
someone
shadow
like David,
banning.
I don't.
It's called shadow banning.
Absolutely.
And you know,
Someone like,
I tell you
yeah.
that my Loving Life YouTube channel, if you typed in Loving Life in Google up until about 6 months ago, that's the first thing that came up because it has such a big subscriber base. But if you type in Loving Life now, it takes you to a YouTube song called Loving Life. And
I
my
saw
my
that.
channel is now kind of hidden somewhere down on the first page. But that's what they do. They shadow ban.
Yeah. The other dilemma is that also I've seen that they've banned the idea, which is it has been coming out and was brought by individuals out there, that at the outset of the pandemic, the CDC in the United States was instructed to change the methodology regarding the death certificates with a view to, in a sense, artificially inflating
Inflate, yeah.
the number of COVID deaths. And you know, there was a guideline published by the CDC in 2003, which gives you certain standards in establishing how death certificates can in fact be issued, and of course the accuracy of the death certificates. That's the kind of industry standard. It's the medical examination and the coroner's handbook on death registration, as published in 2003. And I've noticed now that that guideline for establishing death certificates has been totally cancelled. Um, and the question we need to ask is why? Why has this been cancelled? As at December 2020, which is just about 4 months ago, the CDC was forced to concede that 94%, and this is on the official website,
Yeah.
94% of the deaths attributed to COVID did in fact have comorbidities. And for 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. But
Now,
the point being
can I
made is
just
that,
pick up on that
yeah,
point you just raised? Because it's a very, very important point. And that is that the actual inflated figure of deaths given or attributed to COVID-19 is a load of BS. And now that the vaccine is causing deaths, they're now saying, oh no, that wasn't the vaccine. These people had comorbidities. So, with the COVID-19 virus, the comorbidities were pushed into the background, but now the same thing, the deaths are happening through the vaccine, they're blaming it on comorbidities. So there's been a change in the way they're actually presenting information. And talking about presenting information in the CDC, I should tell you that if you go to their vaccine adverse reaction database, which I looked at in November last year, and you could have a look, or December last year, and you could look at how many different ailments were being caused by having the vaccine. And it was quite horrendous, some of the information. If you try and go in there now, it's still there. The database is still there. But if you select anything to do with COVID-19, like Pfizer or Moderna, to have a look at the adverse reactions, on their database, it says error, cannot find file. They've actually censored that information. Why?
well, this is a problem because the question is, will COVID-19 be the underlying cause of death? And for me, the concept on its own is fundamental, because the underlying cause of death in any given instance by the CDC or defined by the World Health Organization is always defined as the disease or injury that initiated the train of events leading directly to death. That's, in a nutshell, how the World Health Organization defines it. Now, when you say, for example, that somebody dies of COVID-related illnesses, what are you actually saying? If you're dying of COVID-19, you either die of COVID-19 or you don't die of COVID-19. If you die of a COVID-related illness, what are you saying? What does that actually mean? What the CDC is basically obfuscating and, in fact, recommending with regards to the statistical coding and the categorization is that they're saying that COVID-19 is expected to be the underlying cause of death more often than not. Now, this raises a number of disturbing questions, because how do you define, what do you mean when you say the underlying cause of death in a particular person is more often than not COVID-19, or as a result of having died of a COVID-19 related illness? there is, the problem is there needs to be, and we as society need to hold the medical establishment accountable in terms of the choice of words. Because the above directive that is given by them is purely categorical, but in many instances it's a play on words. If you look at their own standards, a certifier who gives someone who gives a certificate of death, you are not allowed to report any particular virus or illness without identifying a specific strain of virus. And the guidelines obviously recommend that this particular strain needs to be, either X, Y, and Z. With the result being is that the certifier now is forced to impose on the death certificate COVID-19. So what happens then if the doctor who gives the death certificate reports a coronavirus without identifying that it is in fact COVID-19 or not COVID-19? In that particular instance, you'd have the health bodies will then ask the states to follow up or verify whether or not the coronavirus was in fact COVID. So it's a total confusion that is there. Therefore, you have most of the death certificates that are coming out, they are using words like probably COVID-19, likely COVID-19, dying of COVID-related comorbidity. But I mean, this is not how people speak. But all these figures, probably COVID-19, likely COVID-19, died of a COVID-19 related illness, all of them are now categorized by the CDC as the individual having died of COVID-19 or being a COVID-19 death statistic. And even more problematic is that if there is a pending COVID-19 test that is reported on the death certificate, meaning that the person died, but there is now a pending COVID-19 test that needs to be done in order to determine whether he died of COVID-19 or not, that is also now added on the death certificate, and the person is viewed as a COVID-19 statistic. So there are no loopholes. And it seems to me that, there are people getting sick. But what is happening is that these flawed estimates of the causes of death in the United States, in parts of Europe, in your country, throughout the world, are being deliberately manipulated to fulfill a specific and devious objective and agenda that is happening. And that is a shameful thing. That is where people need to be looking at and need to be questioning the medical establishment, not with this whole thing about, oh, there's nothing out there, but questioning them on these particular issues. That why is it that if the presumed cause of death is COVID-19, then the person is automatically deemed as having died of COVID-19?
Right.
But if the presumed cause of death is not COVID-19, then it's probably that he had COVID-19. And what kind of rubbish is this?
Yeah. Now, Yusuf, yeah. I want to move on to a completely different subject because it's something we need to talk about tonight. And we've been talking about this for an hour now. And that is ISIS, the Islamic State, Iraq, Syria, or as it's called in Mozambique, ISAC, Islamic State Africa Corp. Now, ISAC is up in Palma region, right in that northern little territory of Mozambique. Do you want to give a bit of a rundown to the background to ISIS and why they are so dangerous?
Well, look, at the outset, let's basically define what ISIS is. ISIS is a death cult. I would call it an anti-Islamic movement, fundamentally a death cult that emerged out of the war of Iraq. Some would argue that it is one of the foot soldiers of the United States government, because if you look at places like Syria, where the United States was very much opposed to the Assad regime, these movements, which would in other circumstances be deemed and described as ISIS, were in fact supported by the United States against the Assad regime, whereas in Iraq, they were viewed as the enemy to be destroyed. But I mean, they're clearly a violent group. They've engaged in massacres. they remind me very much so of the Khmer Rouge under Pol Pot in Cambodia, who engaged in grotesque atrocities, as well as similar to the movement of the Contras in Latin America in the 80s, when they were funded by the CIA in terms of their engagement in massacring and destabilizing government. What has happened in northern Mozambique, in this particular area, in this region in northern Mozambique, is that you have a situation where there has been in recent years the discovery of gas reserves, oil reserves that have been discovered, and with the result being that the community around is extremely poverty-stricken. A lot of them are in a position of starvation, and now you've got this resource in Palma, where basically you have the sudden discovery of potential gas reserves in this particular area in Capo Delgado. And now, all of a sudden, you have the existence of this death cult, ISIS. Not surprisingly, you have the Godfather, the United States military there. And then, of course, you've got the Mozambique military. And all these particular various factions are, in fact, vying for control of that particular region. Now, I can tell you something clearly, Scott, that if they discovered some degree of magical sausages in the ground in Capo Delgado, ISIS would not have been there, neither would the United States military, nor would the Mozambique government be there. I mean, it's totally unheard of. Right on our borders, will you have a conflict that is now so brutal in its nature? I've seen some of the imagery I've sent to Marlene. So brutal, something that you would associate with what we normally see coming out in Iraq or the Middle East's decades of war, suddenly on our footsteps. And the point being made is that it seems to me, many analysts are saying that with the introduction or the discovery of these gas reserves here, there seems to have been the creation of a symbiotic relationship that have essentially pumped up their profiles, fundraising and recruitment. Because think about it, and I think people need to be aware of this. If there's gas reserves discovered in your backyard, why would a foreign military be present? Why would it be present? What would the interest be? It obviously would raise a number of questions. If on the one hand you've got another movement which is purportedly engaging in acts of sanguinary warfare and violence and massacre of the brutal kind that is happening, this creature known as ISIS, then the presence of the United States government and the military makes sense. So the argument could be put forth is that the United States is now present to deal with this kind of threat of ISIS. But the reality of the position is that where ISIS has suited the U.S. agenda, like, for example, in Syria, or for that particular matter in Libya, or in parts of Africa, where it was viewed as strategic and necessary, then there was no concern. But suddenly in an area where there is sufficient, and I'm told that the reserves of this gas and oil and the potential there is so massive that whoever gains control of that region will no longer need to basically be worried about controlling the oil reserves in the Middle East or in the Caspian Basin in Afghanistan, for that matter. That's the whole situation that is there. And unfortunately, what people don't understand is that a lot of these homegrown insurgencies are loosely connected to this death cult ISIS, but there are multiple players that are there vying for this particular control of this particular land. And I've got my sources, and I've got an individual that is close to me with the State Security Agency, because I've had personal encounters with ISIS sympathizers in South Africa who I've challenged, that tell me that this particular group that is operating in Mozambique, and the more cowardly version in South Africa, because I know the cowards who are purportedly ISIS that were involved in the Verulam Mosque murders a couple of years ago, that these individuals are in fact funded by the Allied Democratic Forces in Congo, and that essentially this central headquarters and command basin in Congo is in fact funding the so-called insurgency in Mozambique, as well as the fringe elements that you have, particularly in the South African context. The reality at the end of the day is that people are dying. There was a case that was a few weeks ago about South Africans, but beyond that, the population of Mozambique, particularly in the Cabo Delgado region, are extremely poor. They are poverty-stricken. They've got no food, no shelter. And the atrocities have been committed by all parties, by the way. There are foreign militia, there's ISIS, and then, of course, you've got the Mozambique military. And all these groups have committed or pose a significant risk of, in fact, committing acts of terrorism. If you look at the Allied Democratic Forces, which was a Ugandan insurgent faction that has been active in Eastern Congo since the 1990s, it committed a spate of brutal reprisal attacks on civilians for years to come. And the talk is that the Allied Democratic Forces, the so-called, the name itself is quite a bit of the cynicism behind it. They are responsible for the actual funding that is taking place in Mozambique, particularly in regards to ISIS and regards to these other particular factions that are taking place. I think it, yeah.
You know what
Go ahead,
should
Scott.
be said is that if you look at just north of the area that this ISIS group have infiltrated, you've got Tanzania, which used to be Tanganyika. Yeah. And the overwhelming population in Tanzania is Muslim. And
yes.
If you go a bit further north to Kenya, the overwhelming population there are Christian. So you've actually got two East African countries which are bordering each other, with one with a very strong Muslim population, and then you've got a Christian population in Kenya. And clearly Tanzania was the perfect breeding ground. In fact, that's where this mob originally stayed, just south of Dar es Salaam. I've forgotten what the name of the town is, but they were there. And then when things became a bit hot, they moved south into northern Mozambique. And one of the frightening things about this, and you talk about the poverty of the population in that area, is it's so easy to recruit child soldiers. So a lot of the population there, the teenage or older kids, are being recruited into ISIS.
Well, let me tell you something more disturbing than that. Recruitment, and there have been one or two South Africans that apparently been part of this movement, but recruitment is actually taking place in South Africa, by the way, according to my sources and the guy from the State Security Agency. And he tells me that the actual individuals involved in recruitment of individuals gone to fight these particular foreign wars, gone to join ISIS, or gone to join the militias that are basically operating in this region. The recruiters are actually a symbiotic relationship of people within the South African Police Service in South Africa, immigration officials, and then certain criminal elements within the South African Army. At a significant cost, these individuals are recruiting people either locally or some foreign-based individuals living in South Africa to fight this particular war, and are in fact essentially getting them free crossover into Mozambique. But it would not be possible without the aid and the assistance of the Department of Home Affairs, which would mean that immigration officials themselves in South Africa would be involved in the entire recruitment process. So the recruitment is done by, I mean, there was a report, unfortunately I don't have it in front of me, about the sale of arms by the South African government to Yemen to fund the war overseas. We should not and no longer see South Africa and its government as a benevolent group, but in a clandestine sense, they're engaging in this acts of criminality, or at least criminal elements within these various factions are directly involved in the recruitment of individuals for either ISIS or these foreign militia elements that are there. And certainly with the United States presence and the US military there, it simply is a recipe of total disaster and possible destruction if this is basically not controlled and the will of the Mozambican people are not basically recognized. One thing is that
just in the South African context, Yusuf, I understand that the actual training is done in KwaZulu-Natal, in Pondoland, in the Pondoland rural areas. That's where ISIS are now infiltrating. And that's right on the doorstep of people in Durban, Port Shepstone, East London. There's this ISIS recruitment center in Pondoland. Please go ahead.
Well, I don't know about that personal case personally, but I do know of individuals. You see, the thing is that, I urge your viewers. There is a video which I hope I won't get a strike for it, but there's a lecture that I gave some years back where ISIS members, in fact, attended. It's a lecture on YouTube by myself. You just simply type in Yusuf Ismail, is ISIS Islamic, where I dealt with this death cult in significant detail. And what it came to mind is that a lot of these individuals don't have or would like to appear to present the idea that there's a direct command responsibility going all the way to Iraq. But in reality, are in fact operating as lone wolves, more particularly having a more closer relationship to the headquarters in Congo. And in many instances, some of them are forming their own particular factions with a degree of sympathy to the original ISIS and therefore presenting themselves as ISIS. But be that as it may, one of the individuals that I know of that is a direct sympathizer of ISIS and particularly was fingered in the murder that took place in the mosque in Verulam 2 years ago. He had hired some individuals, and then, not surprisingly enough, there was a specialist prosecutor that was appointed by the NPA to handle this case. She was removed at the last moment in this particular case, and the charges were just surreptitiously withdrawn, even though, in my opinion, I had more than enough confidence that there was most definitely a case against him. If you look at his particular instance, there was no direct link with the ISIS movement in Iraq, but quite clearly this individual was an ISIS supporter. He was an ISIS sympathizer. He had basically amassed and created this group of individuals around him, and certainly they were engaging in acts of violence. So the point being made is that it's so easy. It's so easy now for any group. I mean, you and I, Scott, theoretically speaking, you could come to South Africa and I could tell you, look, we are starting ISIS. Just get about 4 or 5 people with us. Now, there's no direct responsibility or command chain directly to Iraq, but we could be engaging in acts of violence. We could call ourselves ISIS, and we would then be deemed as a terrorist groups. And I think that's what's happening in the South African context, and certainly in the Mozambique context, is that you've got these kind of sporadic movements that are basically coming out with individuals that are traditionally sympathizers to the original ISIS and now engaging in acts of brutality and degrees of massacres that we've never seen in the past. And I think that's essentially what's happening here. I wouldn't be surprised if there's training camps in Pondoland, but I can tell you one thing, that these training camps are happening with the full knowledge of the State Security Agency, with the NIA, with the SAPS, and with the Hawks as well. And they are not doing anything about it.
Wow.
And many instances, many times, these individuals, for example, the Tulsi twins were known to the NIA for years. They've been on the radar of the NIA in South Africa for years, but nothing was done to basically keep them in. I've heard, and I've received, and I've listened to text messages that were sent to me by an individual that is within the NIA and reports to those above him, where they have full knowledge of what is going on, but nothing is being done to curtail this or to curtail this level of violence that is happening. And one other thing is that there's a new tactic that is used by the so-called ISIS group in South Africa. And I say so-called ISIS group because they'd like to be viewed as the original ISIS, but they are more of a shadowy criminal network on their own. They are involved in hijackings. And how do they do that? They go to the townships and they recruit criminals from places like Kwamashu and Tuzuma, Amlazi, and so on. And those individuals are then involved in hijacking, for example, trucks of well-known businesses. And these businesses are basically kept, and businessmen are kept as ransom for their own particular agenda in terms of amassing wealth and establishing some degree of presence that is going on. But none of this, again, would be possible without some degree of either direct or indirect assistance from members within law enforcement agencies. And that would mean the South African Police Service. You would have members of the South African Army, and particularly when it comes to direct recruitment for the conflict in Mozambique, you've got immigration officials that are clearly and directly and deliberately involved, particularly when it comes to getting individuals easily across the border without any questioning whatsoever. That is a true crime at the end of the day, because it would then imply that the criminal element, which is the South African government, would be implicit in the kind of violence that you see playing out before our eyes in Capo Delgado.
Now, Michael Lawson has asked a question which I think is worth putting to you. He says, so who is funding them for guns, logistics, uniforms, food, etc.? And before you answer that, I just want to say that I have heard that when we talked about northern Mozambique, and this is a conspiracy theory, but when you look at what happened in Syria, where the CIA were behind the formation of ISIS, I have heard that ISIS in northern Mozambique has also been funded by the CIA. Back to you.
Well, you struck it on the nail. For years in Africa, and this is all parts of Africa, I was surprised when I even came across it. I used to travel to Botswana quite regularly. I've given lectures at the University of Gaborone many times. I was surprised to see the presence of U.S. What they call this, AFRICOM. Have you heard of AFRICOM?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
AFRICOM is the U.S. What they call, not the U.S. the kind of central command where, within certain regions in Africa, the United States, in fact, sets out military bases in that particular area. And this is basically a kind of a, how do I define it? The United States Africa Command, it's a full spectrum combatant command, which is responsible for all U.S. Department of Defense operations, exercises, and security cooperation on the African continent, and it does this in conjunction with the CIA. Now, in terms of the countries where U.S. Africa Command is responsible to the Secretary of Defense for U.S. military relations, you are looking at 53 countries. 53 African countries, some of which are countries like Cape Verde, Equatorial Guinea, places that many of us don't know: Sao Tome, Principe, Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, and surprise, surprise, Mozambique, amongst many others. And I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not so sure where exactly in South Africa the U.S. Africa Command is based, but we can be more than sure that they are based in South Africa as well, where the public. When I was in Botswana and Gaborone, for at least 5 kilometers, you cannot enter the entire area is cordoned off by the Botswana military. And then further down, about 10 kilometers inside, you've got Africa Command, which is a full spectrum combatant command. So AFRICOM has been in presence in Africa for more than a decade now. And the idea is that they have been there to establish security and establish to ensure the kind of security cooperation on the African continent. But I think it's more disturbing than that. And particularly, if you look at, as the example you gave, Scott, on Syria, it's a pity I never sent a video to Marlene for you to play. which goes to show that this has been the pattern of the CIA for decades. They funded wars. They funded the destabilization of governments. I mean, look what they do to Nicaragua. Look what they did to Honduras. Look what they did to Chile. When somebody is good for them, they will support him. I mean, when Saddam Hussein was killing Kurds in Halabja in 1988, who backed him? The United States government. Who funded his armaments? The United States government, the United Kingdom. But when he invaded Kuwait, which was a stronghold, and certainly U.S. had a great degree of interest in terms of its oil wealth, then certainly Saddam touched a base or touched a raw nerve of the United States government, and not surprisingly, you then saw the invasion of Iraq. So you don't have a moral consistency here, and I wouldn't be surprised if the way the CIA were funding these groups, and they won't do it directly, they would do it indirectly. They would do it through other groups, other individuals, probably individuals within the military, individuals and criminal elements within the military-industrial complex of different countries. You look at Congo as one example, as a region where funding possibly could be coming from. And this seems to be an end game. This seems to be the ongoing process for years to come, for decades, right. With regards to how the United States operates.
Now, look, I want to just end off our live stream with a discussion on a totally separate area, and it's a really big concern that people should be watching very closely. And that is that we are sitting on the edge of a third world war. And we're talking about what's going on in Ukraine, where the Russians are now lining up all their soldiers and their armaments on the border of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are doing the same. America is just sending a couple of warships into the Black Sea. The Russians are putting ships out in the Black Sea as well to try and counter the American ships. If you look what's happening in China, they are becoming very, very aggressive against Taiwan. They're seeing the U.S. as a lame duck power now. They'd say it's only a matter of time before China actually takes over Taiwan. And then you've got other parts of the world where there are some really serious military events happening. It's almost like it's coordinated, because if you look at Ukraine as being the center focus of what could blow up into World War III if the two sides start shooting missiles at each other. And then you look at China with Taiwan. What I'm suggesting is that if a war breaks out between Russia and Ukraine, supported by the US, China will then just use that moment in time to take over Taiwan, because the US will then be concentrating on what's going on in Ukraine. What are your thoughts about what's happening right now in the world when it comes to all these powder keg areas?
You see, I don't have a magic ball to give a kind of a straightforward answer. I mean, in regards to, because for decades, I mean, you mentioned China, there's been talk about an impending showdown with China. For decades, I think in the mid 2000s, there was an ongoing talk after the invasion of Iraq of an ongoing possible full-blown war out with Iran. There's been a kind of a cold war with Iran, but there was never a full-blown war. Now, the issue is...
Just while you're talking about Iran, the third area where there's an explosive situation is between Israel and Iran. And that's building up right now as we talk. Back to you.
Yeah, I think coming back to all of this, there was a lull of fighting. You started off with Ukraine. There was a lull of fighting since July last year. And then there's been an outbreak. Yeah, well, there's kind of been an outbreak of violence over the past couple of weeks, in a manner of speaking, in terms of what transpired. What essentially happens is that at this particular juncture, you have a situation where the Russian military, the Russian government has for a number of years been, since I believe sometime in 2014, Russia and Ukraine last year somehow or the other agreed to enforce a kind of a ceasefire in terms of what had happened in eastern Ukraine. There was some sort of violence that occurred over the past couple of weeks. The problem that we have is, why has Russia been supporting these so-called movements in Donetsk,
in the
where
eastern
about
Ukraine?
close to
Well,
about
I can tell
20,000
you
people have
why.
been dead? Yeah.
I can tell you why, because Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, and Russia wants it back.
Well, it's strategic. You see, the thing is Ukraine, that answers it partly because Ukraine has always been a strategically critical country that Moscow always wanted to keep under its influence. I mean, with it was part and parcel of the Soviet Union, and so back in 2014, when Ukraine was setting its sights westwards towards the EU and towards NATO. Putin viewed this as a kind of a threat to the existence of Moscow, to the threat and a kind of an existential threat to Moscow. And so you then saw the occupation of Crimea and these independence movements that were arising in Donetsk and these other places. The point being is that Ukraine still isn't a member of the EU or NATO for that matter. Russia believes that its so-called gambits and the occupation of Crimea has been, successful at that particular time, but it's come at a particular cost because it's been under financial sanctions from the West ever since. And from what I can see, Moscow's main intention, Putin's main intention, is to have two separate regions hold locally elections, govern themselves, not break away from Ukraine completely, but Moscow wants the territories to remain semi-independent or semi-independent, so that they could essentially be used by Russia to influence political developments within Ukraine, such as blocking any moves to join NATO. Because if Ukraine joins NATO, then that's going to have a potential long-term impact on what will transpire in Russia. And NATO, in fact, officials are calculating that Russia won't be too likely to dramatically escalate the matters in Ukraine, but Moscow is worried about getting bogged down into a conflict where there's no exit strategy. So, what we will see is you'll see possibly violence in limited areas. But the one major conception or misconception rather is that if occupying any territory, you require serious financial resources. You require personnel, you require military equipment, you require straight financing, and all the other additional aspects get factored in. The problem is that Russia doesn't have that now. With the recent economic hit as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia doesn't have all the resources to sustain a long occupation in the same way that it occupied Crimea. It wants to occupy Donetsk. It won't be able to sustain that. And so, neither side is clearly happy with what is happening. Russia sees that they attempt to wanting to see some degree of progress towards their outcomes. The problem is that the longer the conflict goes on, the more and more you'd find these new countries or new areas, Donetsk and the other place, I think Luhansk, they will be treated as de facto separate entities that would obviously need some degree of official diplomatic negotiation.
Well, you see, the reason, Yusuf, that Russia wanted Donetsk back and the eastern Ukraine back is because most of the people there actually speak Russian. And not only that, but most of the people there would be very happy to go back to Russia. So it's a geographic, it's almost like a secession type thing. But moving away from Russia,
they would like to appropriate it.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's move away from Russia and talk about the explosive situation with China, which is basically trying to take over the South China Sea with all these little islands it's putting up. It's now having a fight with Japan over two little islands the Japanese are claiming, which are very close to Taiwan. And there's a huge diplomatic row going on right now between Japan and China over that. But China could stub out the Taiwanese army with a, like a fly. They're just so powerful in comparison.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, the issue is this: is that China has apparently engaged in some degree of drilling in the South China Sea. And the main point is that there's some degree of dispute in regards to the waters with not just simply Taiwan, as mentioned earlier, but also with the Philippines. And again, not surprisingly, the United States Navy, they've increased their naval presence in that particular region to obviously get involved in whatever potential conflict that possibly happens. Right now, it's unclear, and I think the reports don't seem to give an indication as to where exactly this drilling actually took place in the South China Sea, because
they've got dozens of little
Beijing
islands.
is claiming it as territorial waters.
Yeah, they've got dozens of little islands that the Chinese have actually established in the South China Sea. And what they do is once they actually build this little island from a rocky reef, which might have been just underneath the water level, they then claim the territorial waters around that little island. And of course, by doing this all over the South China Sea, there are pockets of China which are now appearing, making it very hard for ships to actually go through that area without invading what has become all of a sudden Chinese territory. This is what is going on right now in the South China Sea. And that's why these disputes are happening that you mentioned.
Yeah, the thing is that that claim to territorial waters, I think the court at The Hague has disputed that. But the issue is that Malaysia, the Philippines, and Taiwan, and I think a few other countries, I'm not so sure, but I think Brunei as well, the Sultan of Brunei, have also claimed laid claim to parts of the sea. And again, why they're laying claim to it? Because that has a large amount of vast oil and gas potential. And again, not surprisingly, the United States is again in the mix. So you've got all these factions that are fighting for control in that particular region, ditto to what you see in Mozambique, and the United States government comes into the equation. And so what is happening is that I think there's the U.S. Navy they entered the region on Sunday, I think last week Sunday or the week before that, and the U.S. basically has defended its presence by describing it as some degree of the whole principle of freedom of navigation in terms of maritime law. But it's quite clear that this is not just simply freedom of navigation. This is basically some degree of psychological warfare that is at play, where people are in fact laying claim to this particular region, which has apparently large amounts of gas and oil reserves. Now, again, this is an international conflict. And why the United States is involved, I mean, it's quite clear because the Philippines is a U.S. ally, but they've developed closer ties with Beijing since, that particular president was expressing some degree of concerns about Chinese presence in that particular region. And so since you've got the allies of the United States up against China, not surprisingly, the United States gets involved in the crisis itself. Will this escalate? Well, I don't know. It's difficult to say because, there has been an ongoing conflict with China now for almost close to a decade. I mean, the journalist John Pilger, the Australian journalist, has been speaking about the oncoming war and China since 2012, 2013. So it's difficult to say what the outcome is in relation to this, other than, of course, the fact that you know, if you look at the trade that is estimated to pass through the South China Sea
It's
on
huge.
an annual basis, you're looking at it's about, I think, going to the
Yeah, it's
trillions, not
huge.
billions, trillions.
Mm.
One third of that trade is estimated to be about $3 trillion, and you've got these various factions vying for that, vying for the region, going for this South China Sea, attempting to access these vast gas and oil reserves. I don't know how they drill into the core of the seabed, and then you've got these different parties there. And the United States, of course, wants its pound of flesh, so it has to be there in the region, particularly. So and therefore they get involved in that. What the outcome of it is, I'm not so sure. I really don't know. But it could again escalate, or it'll just simply play out and be an ongoing,
Well,
consistent, and
I'll tell
continuous
you,
process as it happens.
I'll tell you a disturbing replication of past history. In past history, when you've got explosive situations happening in different parts of the world, often that leads to a world war when two countries go to war. And then you've got people taking sides, and that then blows up into a world war. Now, Yusuf, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We've been talking for 1 3/4 hours, so I'm going to wrap up the live stream now. Is there something you'd like to, message you'd like to give to people just in wrapping up the live stream?
Well, you know, in relation to the coronavirus, and we've mentioned this all the time, is that all of us, more than 7 billion people, or close, I don't know, 6.4 billion people, are directly or indirectly affected by the lockdown. What is required, and what I emphasize again, is the development of a broad-based grassroots network which confronts both the architects of the crisis as well as national and regional governments collectively, meaning all of us, black, white, regardless of the color of your skin, have to come together in confronting national and regional governments, in confronting the legitimacy of politicians and their powerful corporate sponsors. They need to be questioning the police state measures. Who makes up the police? It's people like you and me, us. They need to stand up also to some of the laws that they are being asked to implement. And this network, which I'm talking about, a grassroots network that has to be established both nationally and internationally at all levels of society, in towns, villages, workplaces, parishes, not just simply by having this Global Freedom Day or anything along that line, but genuine getting together of people together. The first task is what you're doing, Scott. One of the first tasks, what you're doing, disable the fear campaign. That's what we've been doing for 1.5 hours, disabling the fear campaign, disabling media disinformation, and putting an end to YouTube, Google, big pharma's control of the discourse. The corporate media itself would be directly challenged without targeting specifically mainstream journalists. Many have been instructed to carry out the official narrative. We need to speak the word. We need to get closer to God. And it will also require, in the final analysis, the breaking down of political and ideological barriers within society, between political parties acting with a single voice, because it will require, at the end of the day, when we are eventually called out, it will require the unseating of the architects of this diabolical crisis, and in fact indicting them in the long term and charging them for crimes against humanity. We can do it together if we come together, because we are in the majority and they are in the minority. But unless people see this, unless the awakening doesn't happen, we will continue with the rise and total authoritarian development and evolution of this global Orwellian state.
Right.
Till then, we have to consistently struggle.
Okay, now I've got one final question for you from Greg Adams, who says, Scott, could you ask Yusuf if he believes America will defend Taiwan? I would like to hear his response.
I'm not so sure if they would. I really am not so sure they would. It's possible that they could possibly, but I mean, to what end? The Philippines, for that particular matter, is an ally of the United States. And recently, I think, when this whole thing happened, you had already discussions at the beginning of April. Senior officials from the United States and the Philippines were already having meetings, clandestine meetings, discussing their concerns over the Chinese activities in the South China Sea. So it's possible that they could. It's possible that they could, but they will not just simply be acting in defending Taiwan. They would be acting for some of the other players there on the scene who are vying for territorial control over the South China Sea, countries like the Philippines and so on. Just check up the meeting between the U.S. National Security Advisor and the Philippines National Security Advisor just about a week and a half ago. And they were speaking about, continuing to coordinate and responding appropriately to challenges in the South China Sea. That could mean many things.
Right. Okay, well, Yusuf, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's always entertaining when you come on, and your knowledge is very valuable, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
It's a pleasure, Scott.
I want to thank our moderators for looking after the side chat. I want to thank everyone who's actually joined us tonight and listened to my guest, Yusuf Ismail, talking about world events today. And yeah, I'm going to wrap up the live stream now. Please take care, and I'll leave the side chat open for a few minutes so people can say their goodbyes to each other. Take care, Yusuf.
Take care, Scott. Take care. All the best.
Okay.
Till next time.
Bye for now.
Cheers.
Okay, guys. Now, just for the record, I will be having a live stream at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning with Petrus and his crew, who are doing the walk north up to Pretoria. And we will have a live stream at 8 p.m. Johannesburg time tomorrow night. Please take care and have a great evening.